Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the frozen world of the Viking winter. Imagine the icy wind howling outside as you sit in a dark, smoky longhouse, the air thick with the scent of dried fish and burning peat. Outside, the snow drifts pile higher and higher against the wooden walls, and the days are so short that it's hard to remember what the sun looks like. You probably wouldn't last a day in this world, but the Vikings? They thrived in it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and the local time. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the threshold of a Viking longhouse, a hulking wooden structure blanketed in snow. The air is sharp and biting, stinging your cheeks and burning your lungs with every breath. The days are short, with only a few hours of dim, gray light before the sun dips below the horizon again. Winter is here, and it will stay for months. For the Vikings, preparation for winter was a months-long endeavor that began as early as the first signs of autumn. Imagine fields bustling with activity, farmers racing against the chill to gather the last of the grain, women hunched over cauldrons boiling down meats and fish to preserve them for the dark months ahead. The scent of smoke and salted meat fills the air as you wander through the settlement, watching the villagers stockpile their precious winter stores. Inside the longhouse, the atmosphere is bustling. Women are busy drying fish, hanging strips of salmon and cod from wooden rafters to air cure. The salty, briny scent mingles with the smoke from the hearth. Meanwhile, barrels are being packed with pickled vegetables, turnips, cabbage, and onions, fermented in brine to keep them edible until the first signs of spring. One of the most crucial winter staples? Fish. Vikings were expert fishermen, and the cold, nutrient-rich waters of the North Atlantic provided a steady supply of cod, herring, and other fatty fish. But it wasn't enough just to catch it. Fish were gutted, filleted, and then dried in the crisp winter air, hanging from wooden racks that lined the shoreline. The dried fish would last for months, providing essential protein during the leanest months. Meanwhile, the fields that once grew barley and rye have been stripped bare. The grains are now stored in large wooden bins, packed tightly to keep out rodents and moisture. Barley would be ground into flour, baked into dense, heavy bread, or boiled down to make porridge. It was also used to brew ale, a crucial staple that not only provided hydration but kept spirits high through the long, monotonous winter. But it wasn't just food they prepared. The Vikings also stocked up on firewood, an essential for survival in the bone-chilling cold. Men and boys spent weeks chopping trees, splitting logs, and stacking wood in high piles outside the longhouse. The fires in the hearths would burn day and night, both for cooking and for warmth. And then there were the candles. Beeswax was rare and valuable, so most households relied on tallow, animal fat rendered and molded into candles that filled the room with a smoky, pungent scent. Imagine the flickering light of those tallow candles dancing against the walls, casting eerie shadows and making the longhouse feel both intimate and strangely foreboding. But as the days grow colder, the mood inside the longhouse starts to shift. The bustle of preparation slows, and the reality of the dark months ahead sets in. The men sharpen their axes, repairing tools and weapons that will have little use until spring. Women mend clothing, stitching together scraps of wool and fur to make warm tunics, cloaks, and mittens. For children, the world shrinks. They go from running free in the fields to being confined within the walls of the longhouse. But they're still put to work, feeding the animals, fetching water from the nearby stream, and helping to keep the hearth fires burning. As you stand in the longhouse, you can almost feel the oppressive weight of the long winter nights. Outside, the snow is falling heavier now, piling up against the door. The air grows colder, and the wind whistles through the gaps in the wooden walls, carrying with it the sound of distant howls. Wolves, perhaps. Or maybe just the wind. Inside, the warmth of the hearth is the only comfort. The scent of smoked fish and burning wood lingers, and the flickering light casts long, wavering shadows. You can hear the murmur of voices as families huddle together, telling tales of gods and heroes, and of other winters survived. But it's only the beginning. The real test of Viking winter survival has just begun. As the days grow shorter and the nights stretch endlessly, the longhouse becomes a sanctuary against the biting cold. The wind howls outside like a relentless pack of wolves, but inside, the air is thick with the scent of smoke, fur, and the damp musk of too many people crowded together. Keeping warm is a full-time job. You pull your fur-lined cloak tighter around your shoulders and step closer to the hearth. The fire crackles and spits, its orange flames licking at the air as a group of women huddle nearby, hands extended toward the warmth. You'd think that with all that wood they chopped and stored, they'd be set for the winter. But firewood is precious, and the Vikings know better than to burn through it too quickly. Instead, they get creative. The longhouse itself is a masterclass in practical insulation. Thick wooden walls are packed with mud and clay to seal out drafts. Straw and animal skins hang over the entrances to keep the wind at bay. The roof is thatched and layered with sod, a natural insulator that keeps the heat in and the cold out. It's primitive, but surprisingly effective. You glance up. Above you, racks of drying fish and meat sway gently in the rising heat. The air is heavy with the mingled scents of smoked salmon, seal blubber, and the ever-present reek of burning peat. Wood is too valuable to burn constantly, so the Vikings turn to peat, dense, decomposed plant matter dug from the bogs. It doesn't burn as hot as wood, but it smolders slowly, filling the longhouse with a steady, smothering warmth. And then there are the furs. Everywhere you look, people are wrapped in layers of animal skins: bear, deer, fox, and even reindeer. The wealthiest families flaunt their pelts like a mark of status, while the poorer folk make do with whatever they can scavenge or trade. A child scurries by, bundled in a coat so thick that they can barely move their arms. The fur is rough and matted, but it keeps the wind from biting too deeply. You settle down near the hearth, rubbing your hands together. Across the room, an old man is repairing a broken chair leg, his gnarled fingers working deftly despite the chill. He looks up and grins, a toothless smile that gleams in the firelight. "Cold enough for you?" he mutters, and you nod, shivering involuntarily. But staying warm isn't just about keeping the fire going. It's about keeping the body moving. Outside, a group of men are chopping wood, the rhythmic thunk of axes echoing through the village. Their breath steams in the air, and their muscles ripple beneath layers of fur and wool. Wood chopping isn't just work, it's survival. The more they move, the warmer they stay. Inside, the women keep themselves busy with another kind of labor: weaving. Looms dominate the far end of the longhouse, their wooden frames creaking as women work wool into thick, heavy blankets. The sound of the loom is a steady, calming rhythm, a soft, repetitive clatter that almost lulls you to sleep. The wool itself is a marvel. Viking sheep grow thick, coarse wool that's perfect for winter clothing. Women spin it into yarn, then weave it into blankets, tunics, and mittens. Some of the wealthier families even dye their wool, using herbs and minerals to create brilliant blues, reds, and yellows. But most of what you see here is plain gray or brown, the natural color of the sheep. You wrap one of the blankets around your shoulders, feeling the rough, scratchy texture against your skin. It's warm, but it also smells faintly of sheep, a scent you're starting to get used to. And what about the children? They're too small to wield an axe or work a loom, but they're not idle. You spot a group of them huddled together near the far wall, their breath fogging the air, as they play a game of knucklebones with tiny animal bones. Their laughter is high-pitched and shrill, cutting through the otherwise muted murmur of the room. But even play has its practical purpose. The children are wearing boots stuffed with straw, a cheap and surprisingly effective way to keep their feet warm. It's an old trick. The straw acts as a natural insulator, trapping body heat while allowing moisture to escape. Not exactly comfortable, but it does the job. Hours pass, and the air in the longhouse grows thick and heavy. Smoke from the peat fire hangs like a low cloud, stinging your eyes and making it hard to breathe. People cough and wipe their eyes, but no one complains. This is life in winter, a time of endless darkness, suffocating closeness, and the constant struggle to stay warm. Eventually, the fire dies down to glowing embers, and the room begins to cool. One by one, people wrap themselves in furs and settle down to sleep. You can hear the sound of soft snoring, the occasional rustle of a shifting body, and the wind howling outside like a beast circling its prey. But for now, the longhouse is warm enough. The fire will be stoked again in the morning, and the cycle will continue: chop, weave, repair, repeat, until the sun finally returns, and the world outside begins to thaw. As the days drag on, the longhouse settles into a steady, sleepy rhythm. Outside, the snow continues to pile up in drifts, blanketing the fields and sealing the world in a muffled, icy silence. Inside, the scent of smoke and brine is a constant companion, clinging to every surface, seeping into every corner. You sit cross-legged on the packed earth floor, leaning against the wooden wall. A low table stretches before you, laden with the modest bounty of a Viking winter meal. The fire flickers, casting long, jittery shadows across the room. Tonight's feast? Dried fish, turnip stew, and a slice of dense barley bread dark as the night sky outside. The Vikings were expert preservers of food, and they had to be. With the growing season short and the winters long, every morsel was precious. Take the fish in front of you. It's hard, almost leathery, and reeks of salt. You tear off a piece and chew, the salty, oily taste filling your mouth. This is stockfish, dried cod, hung outside for weeks until it's tough as a board. When rehydrated and boiled, it softens up a little, but it's still chewy, still pungent. But it lasts for months, maybe even years. Next to the stockfish is a wooden bowl filled with turnip stew. You dip your spoon in and lift a piece of turnip, soft and mushy, floating in a thin broth flavored with a hint of wild garlic and just a splash of sour whey. Turnips were a staple crop, hardy and resilient, able to withstand the frost long after other vegetables had withered away. They might not taste like much, but in winter they were a lifeline. And then there's the bread. Heavy, dense, and dark, it's made from barley ground between two rough stones. You take a bite, feeling the gritty texture between your teeth. There's no leavening, no soft fluffiness. This is survival food, a meal that sits heavy in the stomach, staving off hunger for hours. But food in the Viking winter wasn't just about filling bellies. It was about bringing people together. In the center of the longhouse, the chieftain sits at the head of the main table, his beard thick and unkempt, his eyes glinting in the firelight. Around him, men and women pass wooden cups of ale, brewed from barley and flavored with wild herbs. It's weak, barely more than flavored water, but in the cold, it's enough to warm you from the inside out. A woman raises her cup and proposes a toast to the gods. "To Thor!" she cries, and the room echoes with a chorus of "Thor!" as cups clink and ale sloshes over the rims. Thor, the protector of mankind, the thunderer who wields Mjolnir, was a favorite in winter, a season ruled by the elements, when storms and ice threatened daily life. But what about those who had nothing to celebrate? The poor, the sick, the elderly, those without enough food stored away for the long months ahead. Viking society was fiercely communal, and during the winter feasts, even the poorest members of the community were invited to share in the meal. It wasn't charity, it was survival. A hungry neighbor could become a dangerous neighbor. Better to keep everyone fed, if only barely. You look around the room, noticing how close everyone sits, elbows brushing, knees touching. Space is limited, and the fire only warms so far. But that closeness serves another purpose. It keeps the heat in. Bodies pressed together, layers of fur overlapping, creating a cocoon of warmth. It's a necessity, but it also fosters a sense of unity, a bond forged not just by blood but by the shared experience of enduring the dark, cold months together. Outside, the wind howls louder, rattling the wooden walls, slipping through every crack and crevice. The old man from earlier stands and tosses another log onto the fire, the sparks rising up like tiny orange stars. The fire flares for a moment, and everyone leans closer, savoring the brief surge of heat. But even in these moments of relative comfort, the specter of hunger looms large. In the far corner of the longhouse, a child whimpers, rubbing a growling stomach. The mother pulls the child close, wrapping them both in a tattered woolen cloak. She whispers a lullaby, a low, haunting melody that drifts through the room like a ghost. There's a saying among the Vikings: a full belly in winter is worth more than gold in summer. You can hear it in the way they talk about food, how they stretch every scrap, how they trade stories of feasts and famine, how they speak of spring as though it were Valhalla itself, a paradise of fresh milk and green fields. But for now, the meal is over. The bowls are scraped clean, the last crumbs of barley bread picked from the wooden table. The fire crackles, and the room settles into a lull, the quiet hum of murmured conversations mixing with the relentless wind outside. Winter has only just begun, and the Vikings know that what's left of the food must last. There will be more nights like this, meals of dried fish, turnip stew, and ale so weak it's barely worth the name. But tonight, at least, they are warm. And tonight, at least, they are full. The days have bled into one another, a monotonous rhythm of waking, eating, working, and sleeping. Outside, the snow continues to fall in soft, relentless drifts, covering the ground in an endless expanse of white. Inside the longhouse, the air is thick with the scent of damp wool and smoke, the walls dim and shadowed in the ever-present twilight. You sit cross-legged on the floor, your back against the rough wooden wall. The air is cold, seeping through the cracks in the timber, and despite the fire crackling in the center of the room, you can feel a chill settling into your bones. Around you, people are busying themselves with tasks that have become second nature, the kind of work that keeps hands occupied and minds distracted from the cold and the dark. In one corner, a young woman is hunched over a loom, her fingers deftly weaving thick, woolen yarn through the wooden frame. The loom creaks and groans as she presses the weft into place, creating a pattern of interlocking knots. The wool is scratchy and rough, the kind that will keep the cold at bay but leave your skin itching and raw. You move closer, watching as she knots a piece of thread with nimble fingers. The pattern is simple, geometric shapes repeating over and over, triangles, squares, diamonds. But there's a rhythm to her work, a steady, meditative flow that almost lulls you to sleep. Nearby, an older woman is working with a spindle, twisting tufts of raw wool into long, thick strands of yarn. The spindle spins in her hand, a smooth, hypnotic motion that draws your eye and holds it, the rhythmic whirring sound a constant, soothing backdrop. The wool is coarse, but the strands she spins are surprisingly strong, ready to be woven into blankets, tunics, and mittens. You can hear the click-clack of wooden needles as another woman works on a pair of socks. The wool is dyed a deep, earthy red, likely with madder root or crushed berries. Red is a rare color in this world of browns, grays, and whites, and it stands out like a splash of blood on snow. It's not just the women who are working. In the far corner, a group of men are huddled together, repairing a fishing net. The net is massive, a tangled web of knots and loops, some frayed and broken. The men pass a bone needle back and forth, threading thick, waxed cord through the holes, knotting and tying with practiced precision. "Got to be ready," one of them mutters, his breath fogging the air. "Ice will thaw, and we'll need every net we've got." You nod, though you know the ice won't thaw for months yet. But it's not about the net. It's about the work, the endless, repetitive work that keeps idle hands from going numb with cold or madness. In the center of the room, a young boy is mending a wooden shield. The wood is splintered in places, the iron rim bent and rusted. He uses a bone awl to punch holes through the wood, threading strips of leather through the gaps to reinforce the edges. The shield is too small to be of much use in battle, but that's not the point. It's practice. Everything in this world is practice for the day when the ice melts and the world opens up again. Nearby, another child is shaping a wooden spoon with a knife that's almost as long as his arm. His tongue sticks out in concentration as he whittles away at the wood, shavings piling up around his feet. The spoon is crude, lopsided, the handle too thick and the bowl too shallow, but it's a spoon, and that's enough. But it's not all work. Even in the dead of winter, the Vikings make time for play. You hear a burst of laughter from the other side of the longhouse, and turn to see a group of children playing a game of knucklebones. They toss small bones into the air, trying to catch them on the backs of their hands, giggling as they miss and the bones scatter across the floor. Nearby, a group of men are playing the Fatiful, a strategy game that looks like a distant cousin to chess. The board is marked with squares, and the pieces are carved from bone and wood, small soldiers and a single king. The objective? To protect the king from being surrounded by enemy pieces. The men lean forward, their faces intense in the flickering firelight, their voices low and gruff as they strategize and scheme. You move closer, drawn in by the tension of the game. One of the men slides a piece across the board, trapping another player's piece between two of his own. "Got you," he mutters, grinning. The other man curses under his breath and takes a long swig of ale. It's not just a game. It's training. Every move, every feint and counter is a lesson in strategy, a way to keep the mind sharp during the long, dark months when there's little else to do but wait for the thaw. But as the night wears on, the games and work begin to wind down. The children's laughter fades, replaced by the low murmur of adult voices, the creak of the loom, the rasp of a knife against wood. The fire in the hearth has burned down to glowing embers, and the room is filled with shadows. You pull your cloak tighter around you, feeling the weight of the fur against your shoulders. The woman at the loom stretches, her back cracking, and sets her work aside. The men gather up the game pieces, slipping them into a small leather pouch. The boy puts away his knife and cradles the half-finished spoon against his chest like a precious stone. Tomorrow, they'll do it all over again. Weave, carve, repair, repeat. The work never ends. But in the dark, frigid months of winter, it's not just about passing the time. It's about holding on to what little warmth and sanity they can, one knot, one stitch, one move at a time. The fire crackles low in the hearth, casting wavering shadows against the longhouse walls. The air inside is thick and warm, heavy with the scent of smoke, fur, and the faint, lingering aroma of dried fish. The hours drag on, and as the darkness deepens outside, the sound of conversation grows louder. You settle down near the center of the room, feeling the hard-packed earth beneath you. All around, people are gathering closer to the fire, their faces illuminated in the flickering glow. The children sit cross-legged in a loose circle, eyes wide, leaning forward as an old man clears his throat. His beard is gray and tangled, his eyes sharp despite his age. Tonight, it's his turn to tell a story. Storytelling is more than entertainment here. It's a vital thread that binds the community together through the long, frigid nights. Without books, without written records, the Vikings keep their history alive through words, passed down from mouth to ear, one generation to the next. And tonight, the old man has chosen one of the classics. In the days when giants walked the earth and the gods watched from Asgard, he begins, his voice low and gravelly. There was a farmer named Egil, a simple man, with strong arms and a temper like a winter storm. You close your eyes and let the words wash over you. The old man's voice is rough but steady, his cadence hypnotic as he weaves the tale of Egil and the Jotun, a story of a farmer who outwits a giant by challenging him to a drinking contest that's more than it seems. The children lean forward, gasping as Egil tricks the giant into drinking a cauldron of ale laced with sleeping herbs. And as the Jotun lay snoring like a thunderstorm, the old man says, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, Egil snuck away, clutching the giant's golden ring, a ring said to grant the wearer the strength of 10 men. It's a simple story, one of hundreds the Vikings passed down, each with its own lesson, its own hero, its own hint of magic. But it's more than just a tale. It's a reminder of cunning, of wit, of how even the smallest man can triumph over a giant if he's clever enough. But not all the stories are about heroes and gods. Some are darker, heavier. You glance across the room to where a young woman named Sigrid is braiding her sister's hair. Sigrid has a reputation as a talented skald, a master storyteller. Tonight, she tells a different kind of tale. Once, she begins, her voice softer, her eyes fixed on the fire. There was a girl named Ilva, whose parents were taken by the sea. The room grows quieter, the crackling fire the only sound. Ilva's parents drowned during a winter storm, and for months she wandered the village, lost and alone, haunting the shore like a restless ghost. One night, the sea called to her, whispering her parents' names. And when the dawn broke, Sigrid says, her voice dropping to a murmur, they found only her footprints in the snow, leading down to the water's edge. The silence in the room is palpable, heavy as a woolen blanket. It's a different kind of story, one that leaves the listeners shivering, eyes darting to the dark corners of the longhouse as if searching for Ilva's ghost. But not all stories are somber. The Vikings are just as likely to laugh as they are to shiver. You hear a sudden burst of laughter from the far side of the room, where a group of young men are sharing tales of Loki, the trickster god who was as likely to steal a bride as he was to turn into a fish. "Did you hear the one about how Loki tricked Thor into wearing a wedding dress?" one of them says, and the room erupts in laughter as he recounts the tale. Loki, ever the mischief maker, convinced the thunder god to dress as a bride to retrieve his stolen hammer, Mjolnir. The image of brawny, red-bearded Thor stomping down the aisle in a flowing white dress is enough to send everyone into fits of giggles. The storytelling continues late into the night. The old man tells tales of Ragnar Lodbrok and his sons, tales of battles fought and ships lost to the waves. Sigurd sings a soft, haunting lullaby about Freya's tears turning to gold. The young men argue over who would win in a fight, Thor or a bear the size of a longship. And all the while, the fire burns low, casting shadows that dance across the walls like spirits, flickering and fading. The children start to nod off, their heads drooping against their mother's shoulders, their eyes heavy with sleep. One by one, people drift off to their sleeping spots, wrapping themselves in furs and blankets, the echoes of the stories still lingering in the air like the last wisps of smoke from the hearth. You lie back against the hard-packed earth, staring up at the ceiling, where wooden beams crisscross like the ribs of a ship. The wind howls outside, rattling the walls, and for a moment, you swear you hear the sea calling. But it's only the wind. Only the dark. Only the stories still echoing through your mind, carrying you away to a world of gods and giants, farmers and tricksters, ghosts and golden rings. A world where the darkness never quite ends, but the stories never quite stop. The night stretches long and cold, the wind wailing like a restless spirit outside the wooden walls of the longhouse. Inside, the fire has burned down to glowing embers, casting a soft, orange light that flickers across the room. Most of the adults are asleep, wrapped in furs and cloaks, their bodies huddled close for warmth. But in the far corner of the room, a group of children is still awake, their eyes bright and alert as they lean over a wooden board scratched with a grid of squares. Nefadafel, the game of kings. It's a game of strategy, a battle of wits, and for the Vikings, it's as much a pastime as it is a way to sharpen the mind. The board is a rough wooden slab, and the pieces are carved from bone, each one polished smooth from years of use. There are two sides, the king and his defenders in the center, surrounded by an army of attackers. You watch as a boy with a mop of wild blonde hair moves a piece forward, capturing one of his opponent's soldiers by trapping it between two of his own. "Got you," he says, a sly grin spreading across his freckled face. His opponent scowls but says nothing, eyes narrowed as he plots his next move. Nefadafel isn't just a game, it's a lesson in warfare. Every move is a calculation, every capture a strategy. The objective? Protect the king and get him safely to the edge of the board, or, if you're the attacker, surround him and prevent his escape. The game is simple enough for children to play, but complex enough to keep even the most cunning warriors on their toes. Nearby, a group of older men sits cross-legged in a tight circle, passing a small wooden cup back and forth. It's a game of riddles, and the stakes are high. A mouthful of ale for every correct answer, a slap to the shoulder for every wrong one. "What has a mouth but cannot speak, a bed but cannot sleep?" one man asks, his voice thick with drink. The others lean forward, brows furrowed in concentration. Finally, a man with a tangled red beard slaps his knee and shouts, "A river!" The group roars with laughter, and he takes a triumphant swig of ale. Riddles are more than a game, they're a test of wit, a way to keep the mind sharp and the spirits high during the long, dark winter. Some of the riddles are simple, childish even, but others are cunning and obscure, drawing on Viking myths and legends, stories of giants and gods and things that slink in the night. And then there's the game of knucklebones. You hear the clatter of tiny bones hitting the packed earth floor and turn to see a group of children crouched over a small pile of sheep knuckles, their hands moving quick and sure as they toss the bones into the air, trying to catch as many as they can before they hit the ground. The knuckle bones are small and smooth, polished by time and use, each one slightly different in size and shape. The children play for hours, their laughter echoing through the longhouse, filling the air with the sound of innocence, a rare and precious thing in a world where winters are long and food is scarce. In another corner, a group of women are playing a different kind of game, a game of luck and chance. They sit cross-legged on the floor, tossing small stones onto a wooden board marked with runes. The stones clatter and bounce, and the women lean forward to study the runes, murmuring to each other in low voices. 3 stones face up, one of them says, her eyes dark and serious. It means a journey is coming. A long one. The others nod, exchanging glances, their faces solemn. The game is more than just a pastime, it's a way to divine the future, to catch a glimpse of what the gods might have in store. And in a world where life and death hang in a delicate balance, even the smallest hint of fate is worth listening to. You shift your position, the cold earth pressing against your legs. The fire is burning lower now, the embers casting a soft, dying glow. The laughter has quieted, and the games are winding down. One by one, the players gather up their boards and pieces, stowing them away in wooden boxes and leather pouches. But even as the games end, the lessons linger. Nefatiful has taught them strategy, the riddles have sharpened their wits, and the runes have given them a glimpse of what might come. In a world where winter seems endless and time itself feels frozen, these simple games are more than just distractions. They're a way to keep the mind active, the spirit strong, and the darkness at bay. You stretch your legs and settle back against the wall, pulling your cloak tighter around you. Outside, the wind howls like a hungry wolf, rattling the wooden walls. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of damp wool and dying embers. The longhouse is quieter now, the laughter and chatter reduced to soft murmurs and the occasional rustle of fur as someone shifts in their sleep. You close your eyes and listen to the silence, the quiet breathing of those around you, the soft creak of wood settling in the cold. The games may be over for now, but tomorrow they'll begin again. Another day of playing, guessing, strategizing, and waiting for the ice to finally thaw. The air inside the longhouse is heavy with the scent of smoke and sweat, the lingering musk of furs and damp wool. Outside, the wind howls like a chorus of lost spirits, rattling the wooden walls, but inside, the fire burns low, casting shadows that dance across the room. Tonight, it's time to turn to the gods. You sit cross-legged near the hearth, watching as a man with wild, tangled hair rises to his feet. His name is Bjorn, and he is the Gwa, the spiritual leader, the one who knows the old ways, the one who can speak to the gods. Tonight, his voice is low and sonorous as he begins to chant, his hands lifting toward the roof beams, his eyes closed. The Vikings may be warriors and farmers, raiders and traders, but they are also a deeply spiritual people. And in the depths of winter, when the darkness is relentless and the world seems frozen in place, they turn to the gods more often, praying for strength, for warmth, for survival. Bjorn begins to sing, his voice rising and falling in a haunting cadence that sends shivers down your spine. The chant is old, the words older still, an invocation to Thor, the thunder god, protector of mankind. Thor, who drives the storm, who guards the world with mighty hammer, hear us. The crowd responds as one, voices echoing in the cold air. Some of them clutch small, carved wooden amulets shaped like hammers, the symbol of Thor's power. The hammer is a talisman, a protector, a reminder that even in the darkest winter, the gods are watching. And it's not just Thor. In the far corner, a woman named Helga holds a small, wooden carving of Freya, goddess of love, fertility, and the harvest. Helga rocks back and forth, her eyes closed, murmuring softly to herself. Freya is a goddess of life, but also of death, the one who guides fallen warriors to the afterlife. In a world where winter can mean death as easily as it means sleep, her presence is as essential as Thor's hammer. Nearby, a small boy is kneeling before a simple wooden altar, his hands pressed together in prayer. On the altar sits a small, carved boat, the symbol of Njord, god of the sea and wind. Njord is a god for sailors and fishermen, the one they call upon to calm the stormy seas. But in winter, he also represents the promise of spring, the thawing of ice, the return of ships to the water. Njord, send your winds to melt the ice, to bring the waves, the boy whispers, his eyes fixed on the little wooden boat. It's a simple prayer, but it hangs heavy in the air, a hope shared by everyone in the room. Bjorn's chanting grows louder now, his voice rising and falling, filling the longhouse like a wave crashing against a cliff. He calls upon Odin, the All-Father, the one who sacrificed an eye for wisdom, who hung from the world tree for 9 days to learn the secrets of the runes. Odin, who sees all, who knows the fates, guide us through the dark. The fire flares suddenly, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The children gasp, eyes wide, as Bjorn lifts his hands, palms open to the sky. The gods are watching, he says, his voice a deep, rumbling echo. They hear us. But the gods are not just distant figures. They are here, in the room, in the fire, in the wind. In the Viking world, the line between the mortal and the divine is as thin as a knife's edge. The spirits of the dead are said to wander through the dark, seeking warmth, seeking rest. Some of them are friendly, ancestors who watch over their kin. Others are less so. Beware the Draugr, Bjorn intones, his eyes flashing in the firelight. The restless dead, those who died in anger, in vengeance, in hunger. They roam the night, seeking what they lost. A shiver runs through the room, a ripple of unease that lingers in the air like the scent of burning peat. The Draugr are not just stories, they are warnings. In a world where death is a constant companion, the line between life and death is easily blurred. Bjorn steps back, lowering his hands, his chant falling to a whisper. The room is silent now, the only sound the crackling of the fire, the faint rustle of furs as people shift uneasily. Someone drops a piece of dried fish into the flames, a simple offering for the gods, a gesture of respect, of gratitude, of fear. Nearby, Helga continues to rock back and forth, her eyes fixed on the carving of Freya. Bring the light back, she whispers. Bring the spring. Let the sun return. But the sun is still hidden, the world still locked in ice. For now, the Vikings must hold to their faith, their prayers, their offerings. They must trust that the gods are listening, that Thor will keep them safe, that Freya will bring the spring, that Odin will guide them through the dark. Bjorn lifts his face to the ceiling beams, eyes closed, lips moving in a silent prayer. Outside, the wind howls again, fierce and wild, rattling the walls like a fist pounding against a door. But inside, the fire burns steady, the embers glowing like tiny, watchful eyes. The gods are here. They hear. They watch. And the night goes on. The longhouse is dim and quiet now, the fire burning low, the embers casting a soft, orange glow across the room. Most of the adults have drifted off to sleep, their bodies huddled together beneath thick furs. But a few remain awake. Among them are the women, their hands busy with needles and wool, eyes fixed on the work before them. You settle down near a group of them, drawn in by the sound of low, murmured voices. The women are sitting in a tight circle, their legs tucked beneath them, their hands moving in steady, rhythmic motions as they weave and stitch. The scent of lanolin clings to the air, a warm, animal scent that mixes with the lingering smoke from the fire. In the Viking world, women hold more power than one might expect. When the men are away, raiding or trading, it is the women who run the household, who oversee the servants, who manage the stores of grain and fish. They are the keepers of the keys, the ones who guard the family's wealth and ensure that the hearth fires keep burning through the long, dark months. And in winter, when the men are stuck indoors with little to do but mend nets and tell stories, the women's work only intensifies. A woman named Astrid leans forward, threading a bone needle through a thick woolen tunic. Her hands move with practiced ease, stitching a jagged tear along the hem. The tunic is heavy, made from thick, dark wool, lined with fur around the collar and cuffs. It's a man's garment, one that will be needed once the snow melts and the men take to the sea again. Better get this ready before spring, Astrid mutters, her brow furrowed in concentration. Last time he came back with nothing but rags. Beside her, another woman named Gudrun is spinning wool, the spindle whirling between her fingers. a cloud of raw fleece in her lap. The wool is coarse and gray, the kind that will be woven into blankets or thick, scratchy socks. The spindle spins, the thread tightens, the rhythm is soothing, almost hypnotic. You watch as Gudrun works, her hands deft and sure. She is one of the older women, her hair streaked with gray, her face lined from years of squinting in the firelight. But her hands are steady, her fingers moving in a practiced dance, twisting and spinning, pulling and releasing. Nearby, another woman is mending a leather strap, her knife scraping against the worn hide. The strap is part of a harness, a piece of tack that will be used to hitch oxen to a sled once the snow hardens enough to make the paths passable. Even in winter there is work to be done, wood to haul, trade to make. But it's not all work. As the women stitch and spin, they talk. And the talk is of more than mending and spinning. They talk of the men, those who are here and those who are gone. "Did you hear about Ingrid's husband?" Astrid asks, her voice low. Gudrun raises an eyebrow. "What now?" "They say he's lost to the sea," Astrid says, her needle still moving through the wool. "The ship went down somewhere near the Orkneys. No survivors." A murmur ripples through the group, soft as a sigh. In this world, the sea is as much a part of life as the land. It gives and it takes, and every woman here knows what it is to watch a husband or a son or a brother sail away, not knowing if he'll return. Gudrun shakes her head, the spindle still turning in her hand. "Poor Ingrid," she mutters. "Now she's got 3 little ones to feed and no man to bring in the catch." But there is no pity in her voice. Only resignation. This is the way of things. The sea takes what it wants, and those left behind must find a way to carry on. Astrid pulls the last stitch tight, knots the thread, and sets the tunic aside. She reaches for a length of flax, ready to start another piece of work, when a small girl shuffles over and tugs at her sleeve. "Mama," the girl says, her face half hidden behind a curtain of tangled hair. "When will Papa come back?" Astrid's face softens, and she draws the girl onto her lap, smoothing her hair back from her eyes. "Soon," she says, her voice low and soothing. "When the ice melts and the ships can sail again." The girl nods, but her eyes remain fixed on the fire, her gaze distant, her expression unreadable. In a world where men can be swept away by the sea or fall in battle at any moment, the women are the constant. The ones who stay, who wait, who mend and weave and pray. Outside, the wind howls again, rattling the wooden walls. Gudrun shivers and pulls her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "More snow coming," she mutters, eyes on the ceiling beams. "More snow means more time indoors," Astrid says, her eyes meeting Gudrun's across the fire. "More time to sew, more time to spin." Gudrun nods, her expression grim. "More time to wait." The spindle spins, the needle moves, the fire crackles. The work goes on, even as the world outside freezes solid, even as the sea continues to claim what it will. For the women of the longhouse, there is no time to rest. They are the ones who hold everything together, who keep the hearth fires burning, who watch and wait and listen for the creak of a wooden door and the sound of footsteps in the snow. And so they sit, the women of the longhouse, their hands moving in perfect, steady rhythm, weaving and stitching and spinning, one stitch at a time, one thread at a time, one prayer at a time. The wind howls outside, a relentless, bone-chilling roar that shakes the wooden walls of the longhouse. Inside, the air is thick with the mingled scents of smoke, sweat, and damp wool. The fire burns low, casting long shadows that flicker and dance against the wooden beams. You sit near the center of the room, where a group of men huddle together, their faces drawn and serious. Their cloaks are pulled tight around their shoulders, and their eyes are fixed on the man speaking, a wiry, gray-haired trader named Kettle, who has just returned from a long journey south. "You went trading in winter?" one of the men asks, his tone half incredulous, half admiring. "Madness." Kettle grins, his teeth flashing in the firelight. "Madness, yes. But profitable madness. Winter may be a time of hunkering down, of keeping the fire burning and the food stores stocked, but not everyone stays put. Some men, the hardiest and most desperate, still venture out to trade and raid, risking the icy waters and the snow-choked passes to bring back goods that can fetch a high price in the frozen north. Kettle leans forward, his eyes gleaming. The Danes are paying silver for good pelts, he says, patting the fur cloak draped over his shoulders. Martin Fox Ermine. The colder it gets, the higher the price. But the risks? A younger man asks, his jaw set. The ice? The storms? Kettle shrugs. You've got to know the waters. Stick close to the coast, avoid the deeper channels. And pray to Njord that the wind stays calm. You can almost hear the sea in his voice. The crash of icy waves against the hull, the creak of wood, the whip of wind. In a world where land is locked in ice for months, the sea remains a highway, a lifeline. But it's a highway patrolled by storms and shadowy dangers. Kettle's eyes darken. We lost Joran's ship, he says, his voice lowering. The ice closed in around them fast. Crushed the hull like an egg. The men murmur, nodding solemnly. They all know the risks. A single misstep in these frigid waters can mean death, not just for the men, but for their families waiting back home. But what about the raids? One of the men asks, his voice dropping to a whisper. Any news from the south? Kettle's expression hardens. The Saxons are still recovering from last summer's raids. Some villages haven't rebuilt yet. Raiding. The word hangs heavy in the air. It's a grim necessity, especially in winter, when the food stores run low and the silver runs out. But it's also a gamble, a dangerous game that can bring back riches or send men to their graves. Kettle shifts in his seat, his eyes darting around the room. There's talk of a big raid in the spring, he says, his voice hushed. Sven the Red is gathering ships. They say he's got 30 men ready to sail. 30 men. 30 swords. 30 mouths to feed. It's a risk, but it's also an opportunity. For the Vikings, a single raid can mean the difference between a feast and famine, between survival and starvation. But not everyone is eager to sail. Across the room, an older man named Eirik shakes his head, his jaw clenched. Last winter, I watched 2 of my sons sail south, he says, his eyes fixed on the fire. Only one came back. The room falls silent, the crackling fire the only sound. It's a stark reminder that not every raid ends in victory. For every ship that returns laden with silver and spoils, there are 2 that vanish beneath the waves, their crews never seen again. Kettle reaches into his cloak and pulls out a small, leather-wrapped bundle. He unties it carefully, revealing a collection of small, glinting objects, rings, brooches, coins. They shine in the firelight, catching everyone's eye. From the Danes, he says, holding up a silver brooch in the shape of a raven. They trade well for pelts. But not everyone's in the market. He pauses, his expression darkening. The Franks are nervous. Word is, they're building up their defenses, gathering men along the coast. They're expecting us. A low murmur runs through the group. The Franks are powerful, well-armed, and well-organized. Raiding them would be no small feat, especially in winter, when the seas are treacherous and the winds bite like knives. But Sven the Red? The young man asks, eyes glinting with a mix of fear and excitement. Will he go south anyway? Kettle shrugs, tucking the bundle of silver back into his cloak. Sven always goes south, he says, a grim smile playing at his lips. Whether the sea is calm or the waves are high. Whether the Franks are ready or not. The room grows quiet, the fire crackling softly. Outside, the wind howls, rattling the walls like the fists of angry spirits. Inside, the men sit in silence, each lost in his own thoughts. weighing the risks, calculating the rewards. For the Vikings, trade and raid are two sides of the same coin, a way to survive, a way to thrive, a way to turn the long, dark months of winter into a season of opportunity. But the sea is fickle, the ice is unforgiving, and not every man who sails away in winter will return in the spring. You sit back against the wooden wall, the cold seeping through your cloak, and listen to the wind howling outside. Somewhere, far to the south, Sven the Red is gathering his men, sharpening his swords, preparing his ships. And somewhere, far to the north, a woman sits alone in a darkened longhouse, her eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the sound of boots crunching through the snow, waiting for a husband, a brother, a son who may never return. Outside, the wind still howls, a relentless, bone-chilling roar that seems to claw at the wooden walls of the longhouse. But inside, life goes on. The fire crackles low, casting flickering shadows across the room, and a group of young men huddle together, laughing and jostling each other. The source of their entertainment? A pair of wooden skis crudely carved but sturdy, the surface worn smooth by use. You move closer, watching as one of the men, a tall, gangly youth named Leaf, straps the skis to his feet. The bindings are simple, strips of leather tied tightly around his ankles, securing his boots to the wooden slats. He wobbles as he stands, arms flailing for balance, and the others burst into laughter. "Careful, Leaf," one of them says, grinning. "Don't want to crack your head open before the spring thaw." Leaf scowls but says nothing, focusing instead on staying upright. Skiing is a skill learned early in the Viking world, a necessity in the snowbound north where the drifts can pile higher than a man's head. For some, it's a way to hunt in the winter woods, gliding silently across the snow in search of deer or elk. For others, it's simply a way to pass the time, a momentary escape from the confines of the longhouse. Leaf pushes off, his legs trembling as he slides awkwardly across the packed earth floor. The others cheer, clapping and whistling, but his balance is shaky, and within moments he topples forward, landing face first in the straw. The room erupts into laughter, and Leaf sits up, red-faced, brushing hay from his hair. "I'd like to see you do better," he mutters, glaring at the man who mocked him. The man steps forward, a burly, bearded warrior named Eric. He grabs the skis, straps them on, and grins. "Watch and learn," he says, his eyes twinkling. Eric's movements are smoother, more controlled. He pushes off, gliding forward with surprising grace, his arms held out for balance. The others clap and whistle as he circles the room, his feet sliding effortlessly across the floor. Skiing is more than a game, it's training. In the north, where the winters are long and the snow deep, a skilled skier can travel faster than a man on foot, outpacing wolves, outmaneuvering enemies, and even hunting on the move. The Sami, the indigenous people of the far north, have perfected the art of skiing, using it not only for hunting but also for war. And the Vikings, always eager to learn new skills, have adopted it as well. "Next time we raid the Saxons, I'll ski right into their village," Eric boasts, unstrapping the skis and tossing them aside. "They won't know what hit them." The others laugh, but there's a sharpness to their voices, a hint of something darker beneath the banter. Raiding season is months away, and until then, they're trapped here, their energy bottled up, their muscles restless. But skiing isn't the only way to stay sharp in winter. Outside, the snow has settled into a thick, icy crust, perfect for sledding. You follow the group outside, the cold biting through your cloak as they drag a wooden sled to the top of a nearby hill. The sled is simple, a flat plank of wood, curved slightly at the front, with rope handles knotted at the sides. Leaf takes the first run, crouching low, his eyes narrowed against the wind as he pushes off. The sled skids forward, picking up speed as it hurtles down the slope, snow spraying up in glittering arcs behind him. The others watch, laughing and cheering as Leaf slides to a stop at the bottom, his cheeks red and his hair wild. "Faster next time!" someone shouts, and Leaf grins, his teeth flashing white against the gray winter sky. Sledding is another way to pass the time, but it's also practice, a way to train the body, to keep muscles strong and reflexes sharp. In a world where war is never far away, even play can be a form of preparation. And then there's ice fishing. You follow the group to the edge of the frozen lake, where a hole has been hacked through the thick crust of ice. The water beneath is inky black, the surface rippling faintly as they lower a wooden spear, the tip barbed with bone. Fishing in winter is a different kind of test. It's a game of patience, of stillness, of waiting. The men crouch near the hole, their breath fogging in the air, eyes fixed on the water, muscles coiled tight as they wait for a flash of silver beneath the ice. "It's all about timing," Eric says, his voice low. "You see the fish, you strike fast. Too slow, and you go hungry." You watch as Eric's eyes narrow, his body going completely still. Then, in a single, fluid motion, he drives the spear down into the water, the wooden shaft quivering as it hits its mark. When he pulls it up, a wriggling fish dangles from the barbs, its scales glistening like wet coins. The men cheer, clapping Eric on the back, but there's a grim satisfaction in their voices. Food is scarce in winter, and every fish caught is a small victory. As the sun dips lower, the sky darkening to a bruised purple, the group drags the sled back to the longhouse, their faces red and windburned, their breath pluming in the cold air. Inside, the fire crackles, and the scent of smoked fish drifts through the room. Leaf sits down heavily, rubbing his hands together, his breath still coming in puffs of steam. "Not a bad day," he mutters, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Eric drops the fish into a clay pot near the fire, his eyes distant, his jaw tight. "Not bad," he echoes. "But I'd rather be raiding." The room falls quiet, the laughter fading, the smiles slipping away like melting snow. Winter may be a time for play, for games and laughter and sport, but it is also a time of waiting, of counting the days until the ice melts and the ships can sail again. For now, they must settle for skiing and sledding, for fishing through a hole in the ice, for playing games and telling stories and trying to keep their muscles strong and their minds sharp. But as the wind howls outside and the night deepens, you can almost feel the restlessness in the air, the urge to move, to fight, to conquer. Because in a world where survival depends on strength and skill, every game is a lesson, every laugh a distraction, every race down the hill a reminder of what waits beyond the ice. The promise of the sea, the lure of silver, the thrill of battle. The night deepens, and the fire in the center of the longhouse burns low, casting a warm, flickering glow against the wooden walls. Outside, the wind howls through the dark like a pack of wolves, but inside, the air is thick with the sound of voices and the clinking of wooden cups. Tonight, the men have gathered in the great hall, the largest space in the longhouse, a room reserved for feasting, for storytelling, and for settling disputes. The hall is long and narrow, the walls lined with wooden benches covered in animal furs. At the far end, the chieftain sits on a raised platform, his eyes heavy-lidded and his expression thoughtful as he listens to the man before him. The man is named Snorri, and he is angry. You can see it in the tight set of his jaw, in the way his fists clench at his sides as he speaks. "It was my land," Snorri says, his voice sharp and brittle as ice. "My father farmed it, and his father before him. Now Olaf claims it as his own." The chieftain leans forward, his hands resting on the carved arms of his wooden chair. His face is impassive, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Olaf says the land was given to him in trade," he says. "You owe him silver. You didn't pay." Snorri's face flushes red. I paid in hides, in fish, in grain. It was agreed. Nearby, Olaf sits with his arms crossed, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He says nothing, but his eyes glitter with satisfaction. For Olaf, this is a game, a test of his standing, his power, his influence in the village. The Great Hall is more than a place to eat and drink. It is the center of power, the heart of the community, where disputes are aired, alliances are forged, and grudges are settled. Tonight, it is as much a battlefield as any field of combat, and Snorri and Olaf are the warriors. The chieftain raises a hand, silencing the murmurs that ripple through the crowd. I will hear more, he says. But not now. The hour is late, and the ale is flowing. We'll settle this in the morning. The men nod, their faces grim. Tomorrow, the dispute will be decided, perhaps with words, perhaps with silver, or perhaps with blood. For now, though, the chieftain lifts a wooden cup, his voice booming across the hall. Drink, he says, his voice echoing against the timbered roof. Drink to Odin, to Thor, to Freya and Njord. May the gods keep the ice firm and the ships safe. The men raise their cups, and the air fills with the sound of ale sloshing against wood. A voice is raised in a raucous cheer. You lift your own cup, the warm, bitter ale sliding down your throat, a welcome heat against the winter chill. Around you, the mood shifts. The tension that hung heavy in the room dissipates like mist in the morning sun, replaced by laughter and the clinking of cups. A group of men begin to sing, their voices deep and rumbling, the song a bawdy ode to a raider who once seduced the Saxon queen and stole her golden comb. Nearby, a man named Rurik passes a large wooden bowl brimming with boiled fish and onions. You take a piece, the meat salty and tough, the onions sweet and soft. The food is simple, but it is warm and filling, a small comfort against the icy wind that still whistles outside. But not everyone is feasting. At the far end of the hall, a man named Rolf sits alone, his eyes dark and haunted, a deep line furrowing his brow. What's wrong with him? You ask the man beside you, a burly fisherman named Sigurd. Sigurd lowers his voice. Rolf lost 2 sons last winter. One to the ice, the other to fever. Now his daughter is sick too. You glance over at Rolf again, watching as he stares into his cup, the ale untouched, his eyes hollow. The Great Hall may be a place of feasting and drinking, but it is also a place of mourning, a place to remember those who have been lost to the sea, to the cold, to hunger, to war. The singing grows louder, the men's voices rising in a raucous crescendo as they slam their cups against the wooden table, ale sloshing over the rims. The chieftain laughs, his head thrown back, his beard gleaming in the firelight. But as the song ends and the room falls quiet, a new voice rises, a single, clear note that pierces the smoky air like an arrow. It is a woman's voice, soft and haunting, singing a song of loss and longing, of a sailor who never returned, of a ship swallowed by the waves. The room falls still, the men listening in silence, their faces somber, their eyes distant. For a moment, it is as if the walls themselves are holding their breath, the air heavy with the memory of all those who have been lost to the sea. And then the song ends, the final note hanging in the air like a prayer. The woman lowers her eyes, her hands clasped in her lap, and the room is silent. The chieftain rises, his face solemn. May the gods watch over us, he says, his voice low and grave. May they keep our ships safe, our swords sharp, our hearts warm. The men murmur their agreement, their voices low, their eyes cast down. Outside, the wind howls, and the fire in the hearth crackles and pops, sending a spray of sparks into the air. The feast is over. The men rise, some of them stumbling, some of them grim-faced and silent. Olaf shoots a glare at Snorri, his jaw clenched, his eyes promising that tomorrow's dispute is far from settled. Rolf rises last, his movements slow and heavy, his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of grief. He shuffles out of the hall, his eyes blank, his cup still full. You follow the others into the cold, the icy wind biting at your cheeks, your breath fogging the air. The night is dark, the moon hidden behind a wall of clouds. Above you, the sky stretches out like a black, empty sea, the stars distant and cold. And beneath your feet, the snow crunches like brittle bone, the sound echoing through the stillness. A reminder that in this world of ice and darkness, even the smallest misstep can mean death. Inside the hall, the fire still burns, its light spilling out through the cracks in the wooden walls, a single, wavering glow in a world of darkness. The night is bitterly cold, the wind slicing through the longhouse walls like a knife through cloth. Inside, the fire burns low, the embers glowing faintly, sending soft, pulsing shadows across the room. But despite the darkness, no one is asleep. You sit close to the hearth, knees drawn to your chest, eyes fixed on the chieftain. He stands near the fire, his shadow looming tall against the wall, his expression grim. The men are gathered around him, their faces tense, their jaws clenched. Tonight, they are not feasting or singing or playing games. Tonight, they are talking about survival. The fever has spread, the chieftain says, his voice flat and heavy. 3 more fell sick last night. Old Ivar, little Siggy, and Joran's wife. A low murmur ripples through the room. The air is thick with dread. The fever has been stalking the village for weeks now, moving from house to house like a ghost. Some recover. Some don't. A woman named Sigrid steps forward, her brow furrowed. We need more herbs, she says, her voice tight. The willow bark is almost gone. The thyme and yarrow too. But the snow is too deep, another woman says, shaking her head. The paths are buried. We can't reach the forest. Sigrid's jaw tightens. Then we dig, she snaps. Or we die. You feel the tension rising, the fear clawing at the edges of the room. The fever is not just an illness, it's a curse, a punishment from the gods, a reminder of how fragile life is in the dark months of winter. In the far corner, a woman named Helga sits huddled against the wall, rocking back and forth, her eyes wide and staring. Her daughter, little Siggy, lies beside her, a small bundle beneath a mound of furs. The girl's face is pale, her skin slick with sweat, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Helga hums a lullaby, her voice a soft, trembling murmur. Sleep, little one. Sleep and dream of summer fields and warm sun. But Siggy doesn't sleep. Her eyes are open, glassy, staring blankly at the ceiling beams. The fever has her now, and everyone knows it. Sigrid crouches beside Helga, pressing a hand to the girl's forehead. She's burning up, Sigrid mutters, her eyes dark. We need willow bark. And water. Cool water. But the water is frozen, Helga whispers, her voice cracking. Everything is frozen. Outside, the wind howls like a beast, rattling the walls, shaking loose bits of thatch and straw. The men shift uneasily, their eyes flicking toward the door. Somewhere out there, the snow lies thick and heavy, blanketing the fields, burying the paths, sealing them off from the world. The chieftain raises a hand, silencing the murmurs. We need a hunting party, he says, his voice firm. The food stores are low. The fever has taken too many. But the forest is buried in snow, one man protests. The deer have fled. The streams are frozen. Then we go further, the chieftain says, his jaw set. We take the sleds. We take the skis. We bring back whatever we can find. The men exchange glances, their faces grim. It is a desperate plan, a dangerous one. But what choice do they have? Eric steps forward, his eyes blazing. "I'll go," he says, his voice steady. "And Leif. And Rurik." Leif nods, his jaw clenched. "If we're lucky, we might find a stag. Or a boar. Or a wolf." Rurik mutters, his eyes narrowing. "Or worse." The chieftain nods, clapping a hand to Eric's shoulder. "Take the sleds," he says. "Take ropes, axes, spears. And be quick. The fever won't wait." The men move quickly, grabbing cloaks and furs, lacing up boots, strapping on skis. The air is tense, every breath fogging the air like a ghost. You move to the door, feeling the icy wind whip against your face as Eric and the others step outside. The night is black and silent, the sky thick with clouds, the ground blanketed in snow. The men tie ropes to the sleds, securing their weapons, their packs. Eric grabs a wooden spear, its tip sharp and gleaming. "We'll be back by dawn," he says, his eyes meeting yours. "If we're lucky." And then they're off, their skis hissing against the snow, the sleds creaking and groaning as they slide over the icy ground. You watch them go, their figures shrinking into the darkness, swallowed by the night. Inside, the longhouse is quiet, the fire little more than a smoldering glow. Helga sits beside her daughter, stroking the girl's damp hair, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Sigrid paces back and forth, her jaw clenched, her hands twisting a length of cloth between her fingers. "Gods, let them find food," she mutters. "Let them find medicine." But the gods are silent. The wind howls. The fire sputters and hisses, and somewhere in the darkness, a child coughs, a wet, ragged sound that echoes through the room like a death knell. Hours pass. The embers fade. The cold seeps in, clawing at your skin, gnawing at your bones. Helga still sits beside her daughter, her face pale and drawn, her eyes dark and empty. And then, at last, you hear it. The distant crunch of boots on snow, the creak of sled runners, the low, muffled voices of men returning. The door swings open, a gust of icy wind whipping through the room, and Eric stumbles inside, his face red with cold, his breath coming in harsh gasps. Behind him, Leif and Rurik drag the sleds, their faces drawn and haggard. "What did you find?" the chieftain asks, his voice urgent. Eric shakes his head, his eyes hollow. "No game," he says. "No deer, no boar. Just this." He reaches into his pack and pulls out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He opens it, revealing a handful of withered roots, a few twigs of dried thyme, and a single strip of willow bark. Sigrid snatches the bark, her eyes wide and desperate. "It's not enough," she whispers. "It's not nearly enough." The chieftain closes his eyes, his jaw tight. Outside, the wind howls, louder now, a relentless, icy wail. Inside, Helga rocks back and forth, her voice a low, broken murmur as she sings to her daughter, a lullaby, a prayer, a plea. The fever still burns. The night still stretches on, black and endless, the cold biting deeper, the darkness pressing in. The wind outside is a howling, unrelenting beast, gnashing its icy teeth against the wooden walls of the longhouse. Inside, the fire has dwindled to a pile of glowing embers, and the air is thick with the scent of smoke, sweat, and sickness. The fever has tightened its grip, and the people inside the longhouse feel it pressing in like the weight of the winter itself. You sit near the hearth, the faint warmth from the coals barely enough to keep the chill at bay. Across the room, Sigrid crouches beside Helga and little Siggy. The girl's face is flushed, her skin glistening with sweat, her small body shivering beneath the mound of furs. Sigrid dips a rag into a wooden bowl of melted snow, wrings it out, and presses it to Siggy's forehead. "Breathe, little one," Sigrid murmurs, her voice a low, soothing hum. "Breathe for me." Helga rocks back and forth, her eyes hollow, her hands clasped together in a silent prayer to Freya, the goddess who watches over mothers and children. The other women watch from a distance, their faces drawn, their eyes dark. There is nothing they can do but wait and pray. But the fever is not the only threat in the room tonight. Tensions have been building since the food stores began to dwindle, and the men who returned empty-handed from the hunt now sit hunched and sullen, their faces tight with frustration. Eric, his hair wild and tangled, stares into the fire, his jaw clenched. "We should have gone further," he mutters. "Should have tried the eastern pass." Leaf shakes his head. "The snow was too deep. We would have gotten lost. And now we're here." Eric snaps, his eyes flashing. "With nothing but a handful of bark and a sick child." Leaf flinches, his face hardening. "You think it was my fault? You think I wanted to come back empty-handed?" The room falls silent, the air taut with tension. The men glare at each other, their fists clenched, their jaws tight. In the Viking world, disputes are often settled with fists or blades, but in the close quarters of the longhouse, where everyone is hungry, tired, and scared, the line between anger and violence is razor thin. The chieftain rises to his feet, his voice a low, rumbling growl. "Enough," he says, his eyes darting from Eric to Leaf. "You think the fever cares who's to blame? You think the snow cares? We are all in this together." Eric drops his gaze, his shoulders slumping. Leaf swallows, his jaw working, but he says nothing. The chieftain's words hang heavy in the air, a stark reminder that in this world, survival is a group effort. In the corner, Sigrid pulls the rag from Siggy's forehead, her eyes dark and haunted. The girl's breathing has grown shallow, her small chest rising and falling in short, quick gasps. Sigrid presses her ear to the girl's mouth, her brow furrowing. "She's burning up," Sigrid whispers. "The willow bark isn't working." Helga clutches Sigrid's arm, her eyes wild and desperate. "What do we do? What else can we do?" Sigrid shakes her head, her jaw tight. "We need water. Cool water. But the streams are frozen solid." Eric rises to his feet, his eyes sharp. "Then we break the ice." Leaf looks up, his brow furrowing. "You'll freeze out there. It's pitch black." Eric's jaw clenches. "Better to freeze than to sit here and watch a child die." Without another word, Eric grabs a wooden bucket and strides toward the door. The wind slams against it, howling and screaming like a pack of wolves. He takes a deep breath, pulls his fur cloak tighter around his shoulders, and steps outside. The cold hits like a fist, slicing through his cloak, biting at his skin. The sky is a black, swirling void, the ground a blanket of snow that crunches beneath his boots. The wind rips at him, tearing at his hair, stinging his eyes with icy shards. Eric stumbles forward, the bucket clutched in his frozen hands, his breath coming in harsh, ragged gasps. He follows the sound of the stream, the faint, distant trickle of water beneath the ice. His heart pounds in his chest, his muscles aching with every step. Finally, he reaches the stream. The ice is thick, a solid sheet that gleams like polished glass beneath the moonlight. Eric kneels, his knees sinking into the snow, and raises his axe. He swings it down, the blade biting into the ice with a sharp, cracking sound. Again. And again. His arms tremble, his breath fogging the air, his fingers numb and clumsy. The ice cracks, spiderwebs spreading across the surface, and finally, a small hole appears. Water wells up, black and frigid, swirling beneath the surface. Eric dips the bucket into the water, his hands shaking. The icy water splashes against his skin, sending a shock of cold up his arms. His teeth chatter, his jaw clenched, his eyes stinging. But he holds the bucket steady, fills it to the brim, and rises to his feet. The wind howls, slamming against him, pushing him back. The snow is deeper now, the drifts piling higher, swallowing his boots, his legs, his knees. Eric grits his teeth, lowering his head against the wind, his breath rasping in his throat as he forces himself forward. One step. Another. And another. The longhouse looms ahead, a dark shape against the snow, the light from the fire flickering through the cracks in the walls. Eric stumbles through the door, his body trembling, his teeth chattering. The bucket sloshes in his hands, water spilling over the rim, freezing against his skin. Sigrid rushes forward, grabbing the bucket, her eyes wide. "Eric, you!" "I'm fine," he says, his voice hoarse. "Get it to the girl." Sigrid kneels beside Siggy, dipping a rag into the icy water, pressing it to the girl's forehead. Helga watches, her hands clasped together, her eyes wide and shining with fear. Eric sinks to the floor, his back against the wall, his chest heaving. His fingers are blue, his skin raw and stinging. Leif crouches beside him, his eyes dark. "You could have died out there," Leif says, his voice low. Eric closes his eyes, the darkness pressing in. "We're all dying out here," he mutters. "Some just faster than others." The fire crackles softly, the room falling into silence. The fever still burns. The wind still howls. And outside the snow keeps falling, burying the world deeper and deeper beneath its icy weight. The longhouse is deathly quiet, the air thick with the scent of smoke, wet wool, and sickness. Outside, the wind howls and wails, slamming against the wooden walls like a wild animal desperate to get in. But inside, the silence is heavier, a suffocating weight that presses down on everyone in the room. You sit huddled near the fire, feeling its meager warmth seep through your furs. Across the room, Sigrid kneels beside little Siggy, her brow furrowed, her hands working steadily as she dips a rag into the bucket of cold water and presses it to the girl's forehead. Siggy's breathing is shallow, her face pale and gaunt, her tiny body shivering beneath the mound of furs. Helga sits beside her daughter, her eyes fixed on Siggy's face, her lips moving silently in prayer. "Freya, hear me," she whispers, her hands trembling. "Save my child. Take me instead." The other women glance away, their eyes dark and empty. It is a prayer they have heard before, a prayer that too often goes unanswered in a world where the cold takes what it wants and the gods remain silent. The men are gathered at the far end of the room, their faces tense and drawn. Eric's hands are wrapped in rags, his knuckles raw and red from the ice. He stares into the fire, his jaw clenched, his eyes shadowed. Leif sits beside him, his hands wrapped around a wooden cup of weak ale. "How much longer?" he mutters, his voice a low, desperate rasp. "How much longer can we survive this?" Eric says nothing, his eyes fixed on the flames. The fire crackles softly, sending up a thin plume of smoke that twists and curls like a serpent before dissolving into the cold air. In the center of the room, the chieftain stands, his broad shoulders slumped, his face haggard. He looks around the room, his eyes moving over the huddled figures, the sick child, the shivering women, the sullen men. His jaw works as if he is chewing on his words, struggling to force them out. "This is no longer a matter of pride," he says, his voice rough and raw. "This is a matter of survival." The room is silent. The only sound is the wind howling through the cracks in the walls, a low, mournful wail that seems to echo the desperation in the chieftain's voice. "We are running out of food," he continues, his eyes hard. "The stores are almost empty. The fever is spreading. We must act." "But how?" A man named Hakon snaps, his eyes wild. "The snow is too deep to hunt. The sea is frozen solid. What would you have us do? The chieftain meets Hakon's glare without flinching. There is one option, he says. The barn. A low, collective murmur ripples through the room. The barn. It is the last reserve, the place where the community keeps its most precious stores: grain, dried meat, ale, and most importantly, the livestock. Those animals are our future, Hakon says, his voice rising. If we slaughter them now. If we don't, we'll starve. Eric interrupts, his voice sharp. Or would you rather we sit here and watch children die? The chieftain raises a hand, silencing the argument. We take one ox, he says. One. That will give us enough meat to last another week. And by then, the ice may begin to thaw. Hakon shakes his head, his jaw tight. And if it doesn't? The chieftain's eyes darken. Then we take another. And another. Silence falls heavy and thick, the weight of it pressing against your chest like a stone. Everyone knows what the loss of even one ox means. A loss of strength, of plowing power, of the ability to plant crops in the spring. But the chieftain is right. The fever is spreading. The children are starving. And the ice shows no sign of melting. Eric rises to his feet, his fists clenched. I'll do it, he says, his voice flat. I'll kill the ox. The chieftain nods, his face grim. Take Leaf. Take Rurik. Do it quickly. The men rise, grabbing cloaks and axes, their faces set and hard. You follow them outside, the icy wind cutting through your clothes like a knife. The snow is thick, the drifts waist-high, the sky a dark, churning mass of clouds. The barn looms ahead, its roof heavy with snow, its walls creaking under the weight of the wind. Eric pushes the door open, the wooden beams groaning, and steps inside. The ox stands in the far corner, its eyes dark and liquid, its breath steaming in the cold air. It is a big animal, strong and solid, its hide thick with winter fur. It watches Eric approach, its eyes calm, almost trusting. Leaf grips the axe, his jaw clenched, his hands shaking. You sure about this? He mutters. Eric nods, his eyes locked on the ox. No choice. He steps forward, his breath fogging the air, and raises the axe. The blade gleams in the dim light, a thin, sharp line against the darkness. Inside the longhouse, Sigrid presses a cool cloth to Siggy's forehead. The girl's breathing has slowed, her eyes fluttering beneath closed lids. Helga watches, her lips moving in silent prayer, her hands clenched together so tightly that her knuckles are white. Then, from outside, a single, sharp sound splits the air, a heavy, sickening thud that echoes through the room, cutting through the silence like a blade. Helga's head jerks up, her eyes wide and wild. The other women avert their gazes, their faces drawn and grim. Minutes later, Eric and the others return, their faces pale, their hands stained red. Behind them, Rurik drags a sled piled high with fresh meat, the blood steaming against the snow. The chieftain meets Eric's eyes, his face a mask of stone. Was it clean? He asks. Eric nods, his jaw tight. One stroke, he says. It didn't suffer. The chieftain nods, his eyes falling to the sled. Then let's make it last. The women move forward, taking the meat, wrapping it in cloth, placing it near the fire to keep it from freezing. The air fills with the sharp, coppery scent of blood, and the room falls silent once more. Helga does not move. She still sits beside her daughter, her eyes fixed on Siggy's face, her lips still moving in prayer. The fever has not broken. The ox has been slaughtered. The snow still falls, the wind still howls, and the night stretches on, black and endless. The longhouse is quieter now, the air heavy with the scent of meat roasting over the fire. Outside, the wind still howls like a wounded beast, But inside, the tension has eased, if only slightly. The ox meat simmers in a large iron pot, filling the room with the rich, heady scent of fat and blood. It is a smell that reminds everyone of life, of warmth, of survival. You sit near the hearth, your hands wrapped around a wooden bowl filled with steaming broth. The liquid is thick and greasy, the meat tough and chewy, but it is warm and filling, and for the first time in days, the hunger gnawing at your belly eases. Helga sits nearby, her eyes fixed on her daughter. Little Siggy is lying on her side, her face flushed and sweaty, her breath shallow but steady. Sigrid leans over the girl, pressing a hand to her forehead, her expression tense. "The fever is breaking," Sigrid says, her voice low. "She's still weak, but she's fighting." Helga's shoulders slump, a sob escaping her lips as she presses a trembling hand to her mouth. "Thank the gods," she whispers. "Thank you?" Sigrid nods, but her eyes are dark, shadowed. The fever may be breaking for Siggy, but it still stalks the room, a silent predator watching and waiting, its icy claws still wrapped around others. In the far corner, Rurik sits alone, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped. He holds a wooden cup in his hands, his eyes fixed on the liquid inside as if seeking answers in its dark, swirling depths. "Still thinking about the ox?" Leif asks, crouching beside him. Rurik nods, his jaw tight. "That beast plowed my father's fields. He pulled our sleds. He was more of a brother to me than most men." Leif claps a hand to Rurik's shoulder, squeezing gently. "We did what we had to do," he says. "No one wanted it. But we did it." Rurik swallows hard, his atoms apple bobbing. "And what do we do next week? Or the week after?" Leif doesn't answer. There is nothing to say. The chieftain rises from his seat near the fire, his face shadowed, his eyes heavy-lidded. "Listen to me," he says, his voice carrying through the room. "The ice is starting to crack. I heard it last night. Soon the rivers will run. The sea will open. The ships will sail." A murmur rises through the room, a soft, collective sigh of relief. The sea. The promise of open water, of trade, of hunting, of escape. "But we're not there yet," the chieftain continues, his gaze moving from face to face. "We have enough food for a week, maybe two. We have to make it last." The men nod, their jaws clenched, their eyes hard. They are Vikings, men who have faced storms and swords and seen the blood of brothers spilled on the snow. But this, the slow, grinding death of hunger, the creeping sickness that claims the young and the old, is a different kind of battle. The fire crackles, sending up a shower of sparks. A child coughs in the corner, the sound sharp and wet. Helga holds her daughter close, rocking back and forth, her lips moving in a silent prayer. In the center of the room, the chieftain kneels, spreading a square of cloth across the floor. Upon it, he lays the bones of the ox, arranged in a circle. A shiver runs through the room, and you feel the air change, thicker, colder, as if the spirits themselves have gathered to listen. The chieftain lifts his hands, his eyes closing. "Odin, All-Father, hear us," he intones, his voice deep and resonant. "Thor, protector of men, Freya, mother of all, Jord, lord of the sea, watch over us. Hold the ice. Open the rivers. Guide us through the dark." The others join in, their voices a low, rhythmic murmur, the words blending together like the moan of the wind outside. "Odin, Thor, Freya, and Jord." You close your eyes, feeling the weight of the words settle over you like a heavy, woolen cloak. You hear the fire crackling, the wind wailing, the slow, steady breaths of those around you. You feel the hunger gnawing at your belly, the ache in your bones, the sharp, cold air seeping through the wooden walls. And then you hear it, a sound outside, faint but unmistakable. The crack of ice. A deep, echoing boom that rolls through the night like distant thunder. Your eyes snap open, and you look around. The others heard it too. The chieftain rises to his feet, his eyes fixed on the door, his body tense. "The ice is breaking," he says, his voice low and breathless. "The ice is breaking." The men rush to the door, throwing it open, the icy wind slamming into the room like a fist. Outside, the world is still dark, the snow still thick and deep, but in the distance, you hear it, the river, groaning and cracking, the ice shifting, splintering, breaking apart. Eric laughs, a wild, breathless sound. "The sea," he says, his eyes shining. "The sea will open soon." But the chieftain's face is grim. "Not yet," he says, his voice hard. "Not yet." The door slams shut, and the wind howls outside, a mournful, relentless wail. Inside, the fire crackles, the meat simmers, and the people wait. The ice is breaking, yes, but it is not gone. The fever is fading, yes, but it is not beaten. The food stores are dwindling, the ox is gone, the river still choked with ice. And so they wait. Another night. Another day. Another endless stretch of dark, frozen hours. Waiting for the sea to open, for the sun to rise, for the world to thaw. The night stretches on, dark and silent, the wind a soft, mournful sigh against the walls of the longhouse. Inside, the fire has died down to glowing embers, casting a faint, reddish glow that dances across the room in gentle, wavering waves. You lie back against your fur-lined cloak, feeling the weight of it settle over you like a warm embrace. The voices around you have quieted, the murmurs fading to soft, sleepy whispers. A child coughs, a man snores, a woman hums a low, soothing lullaby. Outside, the snow falls in soft, silent flakes, blanketing the world in a layer of white. The river is still cracking, the ice groaning and splintering beneath the weight of its own thaw. But inside, all is calm. All is still. Close your eyes and feel the warmth of the fire, the softness of the fur against your skin. Breathe in, slow and deep, the scent of smoke and wood and earth. Let the heaviness of your body sink deeper into the warmth beneath you, letting go of the day's worries, the day's hunger, the day's cold. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the faint call of a raven, the low, steady croak echoing through the dark. The wind whispers through the trees, a soft, soothing lullaby. And as the world outside drifts deeper into sleep, you let yourself drift too, sinking further and further, down into the warmth, down into the dark, down into the silence. The ice will melt. The sun will rise. The ships will sail again. For now, just rest. Just breathe. Just sleep.